Burger Chef. In the 1960s, if you weren't going to McDonald's, you were going to Burger Chef. At its peak, the chain had over 1,200 locations. It was the scrappy Midwestern rival to the Golden Arches, and for a while, it was actually winning. They introduced the first combo meal. They gave kids toys with their food before Happy Meals existed. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. McDonald's was growing with military precision. Burger Chef was expanding too fast, franchising too loosely, and struggling to keep quality consistent. By the mid-1970s, they were slipping. New ownership tried rebranding, tried new mascots, even launched a new slogan, Open Wide America. But it wasn't enough. The momentum was gone. In 1982, Hardee's bought the company and rebranded most of the locations, Howard Johnson's. In the 1950s and 60s, no brand was more American. With over 1,000 locations, it was the largest restaurant chain in the US. Families didn't just stop at Hojo's for fried clams and ice cream. They planned their road trips around it. It was the default choice on every interstate, right next to the matching motel. 28 flavors of ice cream, the same menu in every state. Waitresses in matching teal uniforms. You always knew what you were getting. And that was the point. But times changed. Fast food chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and KFC began to eat away at Howard Johnson's business, literally and figuratively. They were faster, cheaper, and more focused. Hojo's, with its full-service model and aging stores, started to look out of touch. Ownership changed hands, the brand fragmented, and by the 1980s, the decline had set in. The last Howard Johnson's restaurant in Lake George, New York, quietly closed in 2022. Kenny Rogers Roasters. In 1991, Kenny Rogers teamed up with a former KFC executive to launch Kenny Rogers Roasters. The pitch was simple: healthier, home-style meals in a fast casual setting. And it worked. By the mid-90s, there were over 350 locations worldwide, from Florida strip malls to Malaysian food courts. Kenny Rogers himself was the brand. His songs played over the speakers, and for a while, the formula clicked. The food was solid, the vibe was cozy. It felt like your country uncle opened a restaurant chain. Even Seinfeld gave it a shout-out. In an episode where Kramer becomes addicted to the chicken and has a red neon sign seared into his apartment walls. But fast food is brutal. Competitors like Boston Market expanded faster. Overhead costs mounted, and by the late 90s, Kenny Rogers Roasters filed for bankruptcy. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Quiznos. There was a moment in the early 2000s when Quiznos felt unstoppable. Toasted subs were their thing. A simple twist on the sandwich that somehow made everything taste better. The bread was crunchy, the cheese melted just right. The commercials were weird. At its peak, Quiznos had over 4,700 locations. But franchisees began complaining loudly about high food costs, strict supply chains, and razor-thin profit margins. Unlike Subway, which kept things lean and flexible, Quiznos pushed a one-size-fits-all model that left many store owners underwater. Lawsuits piled up. Locations started closing. The brand tried to retool, but by the time the company filed for bankruptcy in 2014, the damage was done. Nearly all of its US locations had shuttered. Subway had won the sandwich war, and Jimmy John's was rising fast behind it. Steak and ale. In the 1970s, if you wanted to feel classy without breaking the bank, you went to steak and ale. Dark wood paneling, dim lighting, waiters in vests. It felt upscale, but the prices weren't. It was the first restaurant chain to bring affordable steak dinners to the middle class. You could get a sirloin, a baked potato, and unlimited salad bar, and still have money left for dessert. Founded in 1966 by Norman Brinker, the same guy who helped launch Chili's and revolutionize casual dining, steak and ale quickly became a suburban staple. At its peak, there were over 280 locations across the US. But as the decades rolled on, the vibe didn't evolve. Newer chains like Outback, Longhorn, and Texas Roadhouse offered bolder flavors and fresher branding. And in 2008, the chain filed for bankruptcy and disappeared entirely. Red Barn. You couldn't miss a red barn if you drove by one. The buildings looked exactly like their name. Big, red, barn-shaped restaurants with white trim and a sloped roof. Launched in the 1960s, Red Barn expanded fast. At its peak, There were over 400 locations across the US, Canada, and Australia. They served burgers, chicken, and fish, but the real draw was the vibe. It felt like fast food with a personality. Red Barn was weird in a way that stuck with people. Their mascots were cartoon animals, and they were one of the first chains to offer a salad bar years before it became standard. The Big Barney was their signature burger. Their fried chicken was solid, and the portions were generous. But behind the barn doors, things were shaky. Ownership changed hands multiple times, from the original founders to United Servomation, and eventually to the folks who owned Motel 6. As the business bounced around, priorities shifted. Red Barn never really figured out how to scale and modernize. By the early 1980s, the company was winding down. Most Red Barns were either converted, demolished, or left to rot. Minnie Pearl's Chicken. In the late 1960s, fried chicken was gold. KFC was booming, and everyone wanted a piece of the action. That's when Minnie Pearl's Chicken burst onto the scene, backed by country music legend Minnie Pearl and a group of aggressive investors. The pitch was simple: Southern charm, crispy chicken, and celebrity branding. It took off almost immediately. Within a year, there were over 500 franchises sold. But behind the curtain, it was chaos. Many locations weren't even built yet. Recipes weren't standardized. Operations were a mess. The company went public before it was ready, and the stock price skyrocketed on hype alone. Then came the audits. Investigations revealed sloppy accounting, overblown claims, and a total lack of infrastructure. By 1971, the company collapsed in scandal. Lawsuits followed. Shareholders were wiped out. And Minnie Pearl herself, who had little involvement beyond lending her name, was devastated by the fallout. The brand was gone, almost overnight. Geno's Hamburgers. In the 1960s and 70s, if you lived on the East Coast, Geno's was everywhere. It was started by Baltimore Colts football star Geno Marchetti. That name carried weight. Geno's offered burgers, fries, fried chicken, and a little sports magic. Kids loved the mascot. Adults trusted the name. And for a while, Geno's felt like a true rival to McDonald's. At its peak, it had over 350 locations, stretching from New Jersey to Michigan. What made Geno's stand out was the partnership with Kentucky Fried Chicken. Many Geno's locations co-branded with KFC, offering both burgers and Colonel Sanders' famous chicken under the same roof. But expansion slowed in the late 70s. The brand started losing steam, and competition from bigger players began to squeeze in. In 1982, Marriott, yes, the hotel company, bought out Geno's and rebranded most of the locations into Roy Rogers. Hot and Now. Launched in 1984 in Kalamazoo, Michigan, the chain exploded with a simple pitch: burgers, fries, and drinks, all for under $1. By the early 90s, Hot and Now had over 150 locations across the Midwest and Southeast. The concept was so appealing that PepsiCo bought the company in 1990, hoping to add it to its growing portfolio of Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut. But the fit never quite worked. Hot and Now was ultra lean, bare bones, and hyper-local. Pepsi wanted national scale and corporate polish. The two visions clashed. Locations began closing. By the late 90s, Pepsi had bailed. Most locations shut down with little warning. Today, there's only one Hot and Now left, still operating in Sturgis, Michigan. Locals treat it like a museum. Chi-Chi's. In the 1980s, Chi-Chi's was the place for birthday dinners, bottomless chips, and frozen margaritas. With its bright signs and giant sombrero logos, they brought Tex-Mex to the masses. At its peak, Chi-Chi's had over 200 locations and felt like a permanent fixture of Friday nights and family outings. It wasn't authentic, and it didn't try to be. For many diners in the Midwest and East Coast, it was their first real experience with anything resembling Mexican cuisine. But as fast casual chains like Chipotle and Qdoba began to rise, Chi-Chi's full-service model started to feel slow and dated. Then, disaster struck. In 2003, a hepatitis A outbreak linked to contaminated green onions at a Chi-Chi's in Pennsylvania sickened over 600 people and led to 4 deaths, the largest such outbreak in U.S. history. The chain was already in bankruptcy at the time. After the outbreak, it never recovered. Pup and Taco. It sounded like a joke. Pup and Taco. But if you grew up in Southern California in the 1960s or 70s, it was just part of life. Hot dogs, tacos, burgers, and pastrami sandwiches, all served under one roof, often for under $1. At its peak, they had over 100 locations and were a local staple. The menu made no sense, but nobody cared. It was a place where you could order a taco and a root beer float, and that was the whole point. The branding was pure chaos. There were no mascots, no national ad campaigns, just bright signs, walk-up windows, and food that hit the spot. It was one of those chains that didn't try to grow too fast or too far. It just existed, and it worked. But in 1984, Taco Bell came knocking. They bought 99 Puppin Taco locations, not for the brand, but for the real estate. The properties were perfectly placed for drive-through traffic in high-density areas. So just like that, Puppin Taco vanished. Druthers. Before it was Druthers, it was Burger Queen, a regional fast food chain that started in the 1950s with one simple mission: burgers, fries, milkshakes, and fried chicken, all under one roof. Based in Kentucky, Burger Queen was never meant to go toe-to-toe with McDonald's. For a lot of small towns, Burger Queen was the neighborhood drive-thru. But in 1981, the chain made a bold and confusing decision. It changed its name to Druthers. The thinking was that the word Queen made it sound like a copycat of Burger King, and they wanted to highlight their broader menu. "I'd rather go to Druthers," the slogan said. It didn't work. The name puzzled people. By the late 80s, the chain was struggling. In 1990, many Druthers locations were converted into Dairy Queens through a franchise deal, and the brand all but vanished. Sambo's. In the 1960s and 70s, Sambo's was everywhere. It was the Denny's of its day, only cheaper and often more cheerful. At its peak, Sambo's had over 1,100 locations across the United States. It was a place where families went after church, truckers stopped for breakfast, and night owls nursed post-party omelets. But the name, that's what did it in. Sambo came from the names of the founders, Sam Battistone and Newell Bonnet. But the chain leaned into a controversial children's book from the 1800s called The Story of Little Black Sambo. Early locations featured murals, mascots, and branding that borrowed directly from racist caricatures. For years, the chain brushed off criticism. They claimed the story was about a South Indian boy, not a stereotype, but the imagery said otherwise. As the civil rights movement gained momentum and cultural awareness shifted, the pressure mounted. Cities refused to grant licenses. Customers began turning away. The chain scrambled to rebrand, changing some locations to No Place Like Sam's or the Jolly Tiger, but the damage was already done. By 1981, Sambo's filed for bankruptcy. Most locations were sold off or rebranded into Denny's, which expanded aggressively in the aftermath. Arthur Treacher's, named after the British actor who often played butlers in classic films. Arthur Treacher's brought a faux English charm to American strip malls. At its peak, the chain had over 800 locations and was the largest fish and chips operation in the country. The appeal was simple: golden fried fish in a paper-lined basket, served hot and greasy at the counter. It was different, and for a while, that novelty worked. Families who wanted something other than a cheeseburger could get a meal that felt hearty and just exotic enough. But the business model was fragile. Fish prices spiked in the late 70s due to supply shortages and the Cod Wars, a real geopolitical conflict between the UK and Iceland over fishing rights. As costs rose, quality slipped. Ownership changed hands repeatedly, and the brand got passed around like a hot plate. Competition from Long John Silver's intensified, and Arthur Treacher's slowly disappeared, one location at a time. Lum's. In the 1960s, Lum's was riding high on a hot dog and a dream. The hook was simple, but weirdly brilliant. Hot dogs steamed in beer. That's what brought people in. A novelty that felt both grown-up and casual, wrapped in a soft bun. Founded in Miami Beach by two brothers, Lum's quickly expanded into a full-blown chain. The menu grew to include roast beef, fried clams, and their signature Ollie Burger, all served in wood-paneled dining rooms with tiki bar energy. By the early 70s, there were over 400 locations across the US. It had momentum. It had charm. It even had Colonel Sanders, yes, that Colonel Sanders, who was brought on to consult after selling KFC. And for a few years, Lum's looked like it could be the next big thing, but behind the bar stools, the business was shaky. Expansion was rapid but messy. Franchises were scattered, and quality control was inconsistent. The original founders sold Lum's to a casino company that didn't know how to run restaurants. By the early 1980s, Lum's had all but disappeared. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.